Carola Walker is a successful architect living a seemingly perfect life in a quiet suburban town. Her career is thriving, and she has a strong circle of friends and family. Yet, a sense of dissatisfaction lingers. Beneath her well curated world, Carola is secretly struggling with loneliness, yearning for something or someone to break through her carefully constructed facade. She's about to find exactly that, but it won't come without a price. The setting is a bustling city, full of life and excitement, but behind the charm lies a dangerous game of secrets and lies. Carola's journey into the unknown begins when she meets someone who will change everything she thought she knew about herself and the people around her. What begins as an innocent connection spirals into a mystery that threatens her safety, heart, and everything she's worked for. A dangerous affair, a web of deceit, and a life-altering decision awaits. Carola's first encounter with Brian was entirely by chance. She was attending an art gallery opening, an event she hadn't particularly wanted to go to but had attended out of obligation. As she wandered through the dimly lit exhibit, trying to avoid idle chatter, she stumbled into a man standing before a large abstract painting. He turned and smiled, his presence magnetic. "This piece has a certain chaos to it, don't you think?" His voice was calm, but there was an intensity behind it that caught Carola off guard. They exchanged pleasantries, and soon they were deep in conversation, lost in discussion about art, life, and everything in between. Carola found herself drawn to him in a way that unsettled her, like there was something more beneath the surface. His eyes, a stormy shade of green, hinted at something hidden, but he was a perfect gentleman, never revealing more than he intended. Her heart raced, but she couldn't quite explain why. There was a connection, undeniable but dangerous, and Carola couldn't help but wonder, what was he hiding? As Carola spent more time with Brian, she started noticing things that didn't quite add up. Their late-night calls would sometimes be interrupted by a cryptic sound, like a muffled voice or distant footsteps. His phone, when left unattended, was always locked with an unfamiliar code. Brian was charming, but there was a distant edge to him, something guarded. One evening, they were sitting together in a quiet cafe when Carola overheard a conversation from the next table, mention of a man with a dangerous past who'd been keeping a low profile. Her eyes darted to Brian, and for the first time, she wondered if the conversation had been about him. Her suspicions were heightened when she met Lara, an old friend of Brian's, who seemed to know a little too much about his past and was quick to drop cryptic comments like, "Brian's never been good at keeping things secret." Lara's eyes lingered on Carola for longer than felt comfortable. Carola couldn't ignore the mounting evidence of something being off. The deeper she went into Brian's world, the more dangerous it seemed. Her feelings for him were growing, but so was the gnawing suspicion that he might be involved in something she wasn't prepared to understand. Despite the unsettling signs, Carola couldn't help but be drawn further into Brian's world. He was a mystery, and for once, Carola wanted to know the truth. Their late-night conversations, sometimes intense and other times tender, made her heart race. She saw moments of genuine warmth in Brian, but she also saw cracks, small moments where his facade slipped. One night after a quiet dinner, they walked under the stars, his hand brushing hers in a gesture that felt both comforting and dangerous. She caught a fleeting moment of vulnerability in his eyes, like he was fighting something within himself. "Do you ever feel like you're not really living?" Brian asked, his voice almost a whisper. "Like everything's a game, but no one knows the rules?" Carola hesitated. She did, but she couldn't voice it. Instead, she found herself leaning in, drawn to him, to the magnetic pull of someone who seemed to have the answers she was seeking. But as the days passed, Carola couldn't shake the feeling that there was more lurking in the shadows of his life. Something darker, something dangerous. It wasn't supposed to happen. Carola had simply gone to Brian's apartment to surprise him with dinner. Instead, she found his front door slightly ajar. Stepping inside, she called out for him, but there was no response. She wandered into the living room, where a small piece of paper caught her eye. It was a torn document, one that looked out of place among the casual clutter. As she picked it up, her heart skipped a beat. The paper was a blackmail note, coded with references to a time and place that seemed far too familiar. Brian's name was on it. Her fingers shook as she read the words, each one pulling her deeper into a web of lies she hadn't known existed. Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Brian appeared, his face instantly falling when he saw the paper in her hands. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said, his voice cold. Carolla's stomach turned. Everything she had built with him, every moment of intimacy, now felt like a lie. The trust she had given him shattered. Her pulse quickened as she wondered what else he had been hiding, and how far this dangerous game really went. Carolla's confrontation with Brian was inevitable, but nothing could have prepared her for the coldness in his eyes when she demanded answers. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his tone flat, but there was a flicker of something, fear, guilt, in his eyes that he couldn't completely hide. "You're lying," Carolla shouted, her voice trembling with frustration. "I found the note. What's going on, Brian? What's really happening here?" Brian took a step toward her, his presence both comforting and threatening. "You don't understand," he said softly, but Carolla could hear the threat beneath his words. "I did it to protect you." Carolla's mind raced. He was denying it, deflecting, but her gut told her otherwise. She could see the cracks in his calm facade, but doubt gnawed at her. Could he really be the person he had appeared to be? Everything inside her screamed to walk away, but she couldn't. Not yet. The stakes were higher than ever. Was she in too deep to get out? The choice was becoming clearer and more dangerous. Carolla found herself at a crossroads. Could she walk away from Brian, from everything he represented before she was too far gone? Or did she risk becoming part of a game she didn't fully understand? A threatening phone call from an anonymous number pushed her to the edge. "Stay away from him, or you'll regret it," the voice warned. It was cold, devoid of emotion, and the line went dead before Carolla could respond. She knew then this wasn't just a personal affair. It was a tangled mess of power, lies, and possible criminal activity. Brian had been hiding more than a secret relationship. He was in deep with people who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. But Carolla wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. She was in too deep, and the lure of the unknown, of understanding the full story, was too strong. Her decision would either pull her into a darker world or be the end of everything she had come to know. The final reveal came unexpectedly, in a place Carolla never imagined, a police interrogation room. Brian, once the charming and enigmatic figure in her life, was now sitting across from her, handcuffed and silent. "I thought I knew you," Carolla whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. Brian looked up at her, his expression cold. "You never really did." The truth hit Carolla like a truck. Brian wasn't the man she thought he was. He was a criminal, deeply embedded in an underground network that operated on the fringes of the law. The blackmail note, the threats, and his evasive behavior all made sense now. But the most shocking revelation came next. Brian wasn't just involved. He had used her. She had been a pawn in a much larger game. Carolla's stomach churned as she realized that her feelings for him had blinded her to the truth. There was no turning back. She had to choose, face the dangerous consequences of the web she was entangled in, or cut all ties with Brian forever. Carolla walked away from the police station, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had learned. The world she had once known now felt like a distant memory, one she couldn't quite reclaim. Brian was gone, but the choices she had made, the risks she had taken, would haunt her forever. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing. Trust had been shattered, and some games were too dangerous to play. As the night swallowed her whole, Carolla felt an uneasy sense of uncertainty. Had she truly escaped, or had the web simply grown more tangled? One thing was for certain: the consequences of her decisions were far from over.